Good afternoon and welcome to Nick Batter, legislative candidate from District 13. Thank you, Nick, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today are advocacy lead volunteers Joyce Beck, Bob Lassen, and Mike Barwick. Nick, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. To begin, Nick, if you want to start us off by giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign, and we try to keep that to 5 minutes or less, that would be great. And then once we've completed your opening, we'll move into the questions. So I will pitch it back to you, Nick. Welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's just good to be able to communicate with as many people as I can. My background's pretty straightforward. I was born to a teen mom. I grew up really poor. We bounced around a lot, but a lot of my childhood, it wasn't a sad one, and that's because I had a lot of family in the area. So my grandparents had custody of me for some of my childhood, and really I had a childhood because my grandparents gave up their retirement to give that to me. So I grew up in their home. For a lot of my upbringing, it gave me a stable place, a stable address to have for elementary school. And just by kind of serendipitous luck, when it was time for me to start looking at where to go to college, it was the year that Harvard University passed need-blind admission. What that means in plain English is poor kids can go to Harvard. So that timing worked well. I applied and fortunately was one of maybe a dozen or 2 dozen students across the country that got to attend. And I realized that for the rare opportunity it was. And it was a big shift of gears, going from, being a kid on food stamps and free lunch at school to the dining halls there. But worked really hard to do well there. And when you kind of change modes of life that quickly, at least for me, it really created a big sense of debt to me. And the way that I repay that debt is public service, and that's been true my entire life. So when I graduated, I enlisted in the Army to do civil works construction. So I was a builder in the Army and served there. Never did anything too exciting, never deployed to combat or anything. So it was mostly just, building projects and leading soldiers that way. And then I used my GI Bill to pay for a law degree here in Nebraska. I always knew I was going to settle here, and also used a VA benefits to get a home in my district where I've lived my entire adult life. And so have a law degree and had a background in construction. So today I'm an infrastructure attorney, and so build the roads and bridges that everybody in Nebraska drives on. So if you're in Nebraska and drove more than 10 miles today, you probably drove on a road I had some involvement with, because I've been involved in a lot of them. So love my state, love where I live. And I know the story I'm supposed to tell as a poor kid is that I'm great and I pulled myself up with my bootstraps. The reality is that the people around me pulled me up, and those are the people that I'm running to serve and want to put in some hard work for.
Thank you, Nick. What an amazing story. And first and foremost, congratulations for doing what you've done and having the support system that you have, but also thank you for your service to our country. Even combat or not, there's lots of things involved in that. So thank you for your service. I really appreciate it. With that, we'll now kind of move into the question section, and we provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50-plus in Nebraska. We're again trying to allot about 5 minutes for each question.
Sure.
I will let you know they are pretty jam-packed with information, and the questions themselves are jam-packed. So as much top level as you can on the questions would be great. So our first question this afternoon is on health, caregiving, and home and community-based care, and Joyce Beck is going to take that. So go ahead, Joyce.
Good afternoon, Nick. Thank you for giving us some of your time. I really appreciate it. 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say staying at home as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services and area agencies on aging become important assets to caregivers as they care for loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of their loved ones, but it also provides relief to an already strained long-term care industry. So I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is this: What would you do to protect and or expand home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention of a sufficient workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? And the second question is, what would you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska?
Yeah, so to address the first question about workforce retention, I think there's several things we can do. I think that the legislature recently has looked at some apprenticeship bills that would allow incentive for employers to pay for some of the training that's necessary and certifications that are needed, because someone that's looking to, enter healthcare in general, which is not only intellectual work, but it's physical work. And we need to make sure that there's competitive pay available for people entering that, because that's different than a job, maybe in just customer service or something. But sometimes we see that those jobs are paying the same, even though caregivers have a much greater responsibility, and have a much more stressful job at the end of the day. So I'd love to support the workforce bills that we've seen come up. Many didn't pass last session, so I'd like to see those renewed, especially in healthcare. I think that's the area we have the greatest need. I am happy to have been a supporter, an early supporter and a continued supporter of Heartland Workforce's solution expansion to South Omaha. They have a new career center down here, in addition to their other facility that's in my district, that will help attract people to the workforce. So anything we can do to attract that, I think pay is a big part of that, but I think also just having strong communities, places where people can live. So for instance, in my district, the highest traffic bus stop is the bus stop in front of the Florence home. And that's largely due to residents, but also due to the workforce that comes in that way. And so making sure we have strong ways for people to get to work and affordable ways for people to get to work is really important. And that factors in people's decisions of what jobs they're going to take. The second part of your question was about unpaid caregivers. So I think one is just making sure we have a good support network for them. Some of that comes through zoning, right? So in terms of multifamily households or different arrangements, making sure that our local governments aren't being overly restrictive in a way that essentially just making sure our laws reflect the way that people live their lives. So, again, for me, I was often living with an aunt and an uncle. I didn't have a conventional family in my childhood in a way that zoning might not have liked. So I think that looking at that is a big way to ensure that people are able to do that. And I'd certainly be interested in looking at tax incentives for people that are contributing to our economy in a way that might not be reflected by an economist, but certainly adds a tremendous amount of value.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nick. And you've kind of stolen our playbook, because we're going to ask you about livable communities in a little bit. So
Okay.
Great answers, and thank you for that. Thank you, Joyce, for the question. Our second question now will come from Mike Barwig on consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections. So go ahead, Mike.
Good afternoon, Nick. So scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams such as wire transfers, gift card scams, and schemes involving real property. Nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. With that in mind, our questions for you are: consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online, financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to address and ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive or unfair business practices, and provide opportunities for redress to victims of fraud? In other words, would you support enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices, enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund, and or implementation of preventative or corrective measures to assist in combating owner-seller housing impersonation fraud.
Thank you. And also just thanks for bringing attention to this issue, because just where technology is headed, it's going to get worse. So just the way that impersonating and mimicking voices and things, we're going to see this growing as a problem. And I've been behind somebody in the bank that's a victim of this and have to watch their tragedy unfold in front of me. So it's something we need to get ahead of. I think, and I'm supportive and I'm happy to talk about the laws you suggested. But I think, one immediate thing we can do is education. So I know there have been law enforcement efforts to just meet with seniors and go to places where seniors are at and put fraud information, in front of seniors so that they can kind of use that as a reference of knowing, hey, these certain activities are fishy, and that can help nip it in the bud. I know a lot of times I've had, my grandma call me and say, hey, so-and-so just said this by email. And I'm like, nope, delete it, ignore it, you're fine. And sometimes it takes that. But had I not picked up the phone, what might have happened? And as we target seniors, if you guys have a resource too, I'm sending out a lot of mail, and I don't want the result of my campaign, win or lose, to have generated a lot of mail with my face on it. Really, that's not what I'm running to do. And so if you have fraud information that I can include in mail that's going to seniors, I've got the stamp anyway, please send it my way. Happy to share that, because I think it is useful. Education is important. But in terms of specifically what you mentioned, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of, warning people at the, point source of gift cards, because a lot of these people are on the phone with somebody in their ear that's telling them they need to get these gift cards to do it. And I think the more gut checks we have, the more time someone has to pause for a second and say, is this exactly right? Like, would the IRS be sending me to Target to get a Visa gift card? Can help snap them out of it, right? And because it seems very convincing and it's very intimidating. So, it's one of those things that when you're in the moment, it seems very real, it seems plausible, and the people that are doing this are experts at it. And so I think that, opportunities to snap them into reality, and also just to make sure that, the consumer protection department in Nebraska is strong and responsive to those things. I'd support all those measures. So the legislation you suggested, obviously we want to see the details of that, but makes a lot of sense to me. And I have a hard time knowing who would be opposed to it, because from the merchant point of view, also, I don't want to be known as the business where everybody comes and, gets scammed out of their money. Like, that can't be good for them either. And I'm sure customer service reps don't want to be dealing with, people who just lost $10,000. So it seems like it's good for everybody in Nebraska. And the only person that gets punished is somebody that should get punished, or people scamming others.
Yeah.
Very good.
And just so you know, real quick, AARP, we have seminars that we teach our AARP members on scams, most recent scams and fraud, and how to protect yourself. So we are constantly putting those on, and we have a group of individuals that are fraud teachers throughout the state.
Terrific. And so if you have anything coming up, or even just a list of here's how to detect fraud that you'd like me to make sure I'm putting in mail that's going to seniors, I'd be happy to include it, just to get you guys free postage and, include it in what I'm sending out, if that'd be helpful at all.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Mike, for the question. In addition, what Mike is talking, we do have a Fraud Watch network, and you may have seen it on our website. But it's a huge, again, Fraud Watch network through the ARP website. We also have a hotline that people can call in and report types of frauds and all that. And we do work closely with the Attorney General's office and that sort of thing. So I appreciate your comments on the education, because I don't think we can ever do enough education to help people, because just when we figure out one scam, then there's a new one that evolves. So thank you for your comments on that, Nick. Our last question, it comes from Bob Lassen, and this is, again, one you've kind of already touched on, but livable communities, helping people stay in their homes and communities. So Bob, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for being here today, Nick, and joining us. AARP's goal is to allow people to age in place and stay in the lowest level of care and cost as long as possible. To that end, there's a couple things that questions that I have for you, and one of them is about zoning obstacles that allow just single-family residential homes In these communities, zoning does not include other types of housing, such as accessory dwelling units, ADUs, manufactured homes, intergenerational duplexes, or apartment buildings that may be better options for seniors, and also give them a chance to get out of their larger homes in some cases that they don't no longer need. The other part that I'd like to address is property tax. And of course, we all, right now, it's a big buzz right now, property tax, but it's particularly difficult for older seniors and low income people. And they can be taxed right out of their homes. And in some cases, they have been. To that end, there's some relief with homestead exemption, but we've got some concerns there too. So the questions are, Nebraskans over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population, and research shows that most want to remain in their homes and communities as they age. As housing costs continue to increase, older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs when seeking to downsize. Thus, they're being pushed out of their homes and the communities that they've been into. They have to move someplace else to find a smaller one. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as the accessory dwelling units, intergenerational housing, manufactured housing units, and townhomes? And the second part of the question is, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans that qualify continue to have access to the tax relief program that allows them to age in place?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And just, as an issue of statistics, my district, of all the districts in Nebraska, has the highest number of adults living with severe disabilities and a significantly higher than average number of seniors living on a fixed income. So these issues are particularly important to me and particularly important to my neighbors. Your first question, and I promise I didn't read ahead, just about zoning, is spot on. A lot of that is local government in terms of setting zoning rules, but I think it's really important, and the state does everything it can to incentivize that because it just makes sense. And as I've lived that, but also even just in terms of our communities being vibrant places. I have 3 young children, and a lot of people, have asked my wife and I, like, that's got to be really hard campaigning. And, with those 3 young kids, and it is at times, but honestly, a beautiful thing that's come out of that is my grandparents and my wife's parents are spending time with our, our families spending time across the generations in a way that we might not have had if not for the campaign. And 2 of my kids are named after their grandparents, and so I think that is really important, and anything we can do to preserve that, it really makes for strong neighborhoods, strong communities, and our zoning needs to catch up with reality. And honestly, people have lived that way for a long time. In fact, before America existed, we had intergenerational societies. So our zoning needs to reflect that reality. So I do anything we can to support that and encourage that. A big piece of that too, especially when we talk about seniors and adults with disabilities and on fixed income, is, at least in my community, we do have some predatory landlords that are a challenge. And specifically with those communities, if you're an older adult, if you're a widower or a widow, you can't just grab a U-Haul and throw everything into the truck and move and find the next place if you've been living in the same place for a long period of time. But we're certainly seeing people who have landlords that just allow properties to crumble around older and vulnerable adults. And, there hasn't been enough recourse. And what really boggles my mind is that with all the conversations we've been having about property tax relief, no one's questioning, why are we giving relief to the bad actors that are doing this to our vulnerable adults? So one way we can reduce property taxes is cut those bad actors off the property tax rolls. And that frees up some money to give it to people that are in homes adding value to our community. So for me, that'd be day one legislation, I'd like to see who shows up to challenge me on that, because they're not a friend of mine or my community. Specifically with homestead exemption, it's critically important. I think making sure people know right as soon as they're eligible for it too is really important too. It's something, as I've talked to my neighbors going door to door, I've heard fear about, I've lived in this house forever and I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. I'm afraid I'm going to get priced out due to taxes. And one thing that gives me a lot of anxiety, and I think we're not paying enough attention to it, is having experienced widespread storms across Omaha, homeowners insurance rates are the shoe's about to drop. And so without us having delivered any results on property tax relief, and now everybody's home insurance about to go up, we're going to start to see some real results, negative results. And so I'm really worried that if we don't take action on this soon, it's going to impact those people on fixed incomes. So yes, we absolutely need to protect the homestead exemption. And for people that aren't eligible or aren't yet eligible for it, we need to be working in a way that rewards people that are living in their community and doesn't overtax them. And for people that are living in their home or tenants in their community, we need to make sure that they're getting relief. That's where my priority would be for that tax relief.
Thank you, Nick. That's a great way to end our conversation on the questions in that. And one thing I do want to add to this conversation, because of your interest in the housing, you may have been following the legislature, but again, housing is a really big topic for AARP right now in that livable community space, and we've kind of been working with urban affairs. But last session, 1165 and 1166 were both introduced by Senator Lowe as a member of the Urban Affairs Committee. He's of course term limited. Those bills didn't get out of committee. But there's interim studies that now Senator Armendariz has picked up, and there's plans to bring that bill back, or both of those bills back. Part of the opposition that we continue to have with the municipalities is basically what they would do is require the municipalities to expand their zoning and allow single family homes to also have accessory dwelling units or duplexes on the same lot or land. The concern is, of course, is losing local control by mandating that. And so looking forward, we're trying to find ways now to incentivize instead of just making it a mandate. So when you get to the legislature, you'll probably get to see that bill, but we'd love to have your thoughts on that and involvement in that too, in that process, just based on a lot of the comments that you've made today. So thank you for supporting affordable housing. We appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for taking it up. It's really important.
Absolutely. Okay, so Nick, as we're coming now to the end of our meeting, we would like to give you a few minutes back just to make any closing comments. If you have the specific priorities outside of what we've already talked about serving in the legislature, or certain issues that you want to work on, I want to give you a couple minutes back to close things out. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I already talked about one issue that's near and dear to my heart. Well, maybe is just people that are in a vulnerable position when it comes to predatory landlords. So I won't go into detail about that, but there's two other issues that are really important and that disparately impact our senior population. The first one of that is healthcare and access to healthcare. There was a great bill that passed last session that makes sure that reimbursement rates are being maxed out for the federal government, but there are still other federal reimbursements that the state needs to set its crosshairs on. And why that's important, even if you're not a user of public health care, is that makes sure our hospitals are strong and that we're drawing down the money we can from the federal government. Nebraska is one of the worst states in the country at doing this. So this isn't about new taxes. We all pay federal taxes. This is about making sure that our federal tax dollars are being spent here in our community. I don't want all my federal tax dollars going to California for them to have a great system. I want my neighbors to have great, strong hospitals too. So we can improve that significantly. It's complex. These are long bills that interact with federal laws, but we're already looking at how we can do those, and that will make sure that healthcare is available and strong and good. A second issue that's a challenge in my neighborhood is there's really old funding formulas for how infrastructure gets built and spent. And as a result, in my community, in fact, I was just at a senior living facility earlier this morning having coffee, and some of the roads are so bad that it slows down first responders when they're trying to respond to neighbors in these areas, which is terrifying. It also means really bad accidents. So on a main corridor in my district, there's one intersection that has 37 times the expected injury accidents than you would expect for that traffic.
Holy.
And part of that problem is due to these old formulas. There's a trust fund that's supposed to pay for these fixes. And that trust fund is paid not out of income tax, but out of gas tax and vehicle registration tax, but it's not evenly spent. So some years in my community, for every dollar we pay into that pot, we only get a quarter. And year after year, that infrastructure crumbles. So my community, Florence, for instance, is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the entire state of Nebraska. And many of our roads still look like the pioneers are still living on them. That's unacceptable. And that prevents access to emergency care especially. Or it also makes it more difficult for seniors to get grocery shopping or get out in inclement weather. So those are things I would like to take up immediately. Those would be day one priorities for me. So that's what you can expect from me.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you again for taking the time to visit with us. We wish you the best with your campaign, and thank you again for meeting with AARP today. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for educating people.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you, Nick.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.